and welcome back to BluzesTech Media. My name is Cherilyn Beckles and I'm a photographer and videographer here at BluzesTech Media, and I'm in my Photoshop series teaching you how to use Photoshop. So in our last video, we went over how to import a photo into Photoshop. And now in this video, I'm going to be kind of going over the layout of Photoshop, kind of explaining a little bit of these tools, not all of them, but a little bit of these tools that might be helpful for you with editing, as well as what does all of this stuff mean here. So we talked about the sandwich, right? We talked about how Photoshop works in layers. Knowing that key point is what's going to help you understand how to use Photoshop. All of these tools in Photoshop are helpful in some shape or form for you to edit your picture. Clicking on these double arrows right here in the corner expands this window and shows you all of the tools that you have to access. I have most, or not all, mainly all of my tools here in Photoshop. But if you are not seeing some tools or you're missing something, they have these three dots right here, Edit Toolbar. And when you click on that, it's going to pop up with all the other tools that you might possibly be missing, and then you're just going to drag that over. These are not all the tools that you even have. You have way more tools, trust me. If you look at some of these tools, you might see that there's a little corner arrow, a little triangle right there. If you hold onto Alt, you notice that the tool changes. So within each of those options that have the little triangle on the corner, you have other tools within those tools that you can use. Let's just call it a tool inception if you must, because you have plenty of tools to use in Photoshop. So that's your toolbar section. Moving over to this corner, we're going to jump across to the right-hand side of Photoshop. We have our properties and we have our adjustments, layers, channels, and paths. Let's start off with layers. So like I said before, Photoshop works with layers, right? We know that. So we have these tools on the bottom here: layer style, layer mask, adjustment layers, new groups, create a new layer, and of course to delete a layer. All of those things are going to come in handy when you're editing in Photoshop. Here, these are our color that you can use for your brushes. You can create swatches if you want to. So swatches can be samples of colors that you may want to go back and use again. So for example, maybe you found this beautiful purple color that you like. You can save that and add that to your color palette so that it becomes a swatch. Then you have our gradient tool, so you can create gradient patterns. And then of course your pattern tool, so you can create multiple different types of patterns. I don't really use those options that much. I strictly use Photoshop for photo editing. And then of course one of the most important things in Photoshop are actions. I'm going to go over actions in its own separate video about how to speed up your Photoshop editing process. So now that we kind of went over these tools, I'm going to show you, to me, the tools that I use for editing in Photoshop. The Move tool allows you to move around your image no matter where you want it to go. Now I bet you're wondering, what in the world is those gray checkered squares underneath our photograph? Well, remember in our previous video we went over the sandwich. So since we made this photo a part of the sandwich, now we have a transparent background that's acting like the plate. So even though we can see these gray checkered square pattern behind the photograph, if I were to export the photograph like this, it would actually be transparent. So this right here is called a transparent background. I'm going to move back the picture to its place. What's good to note as well is that these purple lines that appear around the photograph, those are like guides, and you can turn them on or off. I suggest you keep them on. Those guides kind of help you snap the picture back into place. So you've noticed that when I scroll over each of the tools in the toolbar section, it not only pops up with a description of what that tool can do, but also the shortcut key for it. So that's very important to know. Knowing your shortcuts can help you move around Photoshop much faster. So for the move tool, you can click on here for your move tool, but you can also click on V. So clicking on V helps us do the same thing. Next, we have the rectangular marquee tool. The marquee tool, the shortcut of M, allows you to make selections, which is something we're going to go over in future videos. Making selections is very important in Photoshop. You're going to go over select and mask, all of that fun stuff. But for now, just know that the marquee tool is awesome. Then we have the magnetic lasso tool. So similar to the marquee tool, it also helps you make selections. Then you have the quick selection tool, the crop tool. So if you want to crop pictures, you can do that. And I'm going to go over a whole video on cropping in Photoshop. The frame tool, the eyedropper tool samples colors from pictures, the spot healing tool, so that's going to be really helpful when it comes to skin correcting and editing in Photoshop. The brush tool, very much like what it's called. The clone stamp tool, the brush tool, the art history brush tool, the eraser tool. If you want more information on where you can find more of the Photoshop shortcuts, you can go on the Adobe website, simple search of Adobe Photoshop, popped right up. Shortcut keys, it takes you straight to helpx.adobe.com, and from there, this page will load up and it tells you all the popular shortcuts, not only for Mac, but also for Windows. So I highly suggest you check that website out. I'm gonna drop that link in the description box below. Now we're gonna move on to the editing part of Photoshop. I'm gonna teach you how to do a simple brightness and contrast in Photoshop. Now, as I said before, or maybe I haven't mentioned it, this photo is already beautiful, but I'm still gonna work with it. So the first thing that I'm doing when I'm starting to create, when I'm starting to edit a photo, is I like to duplicate my layer. Because, you know, we're all human. Sometimes you make mistakes, and it's good to always have a backup layer that you can kind of go back to if you want to start over. So to create a duplicate layer of this, you can right click and go to duplicate layer, rename it if you want to, press OK. Or another way that you can do that is the shortcut key version of that is just holding onto your layer, highlighting it, and pressing Command J or Control J if you have a PC. That also creates the background layer. So now we have two pictures that are layered on top of each other that'll look exactly the same. Now, from there, if you want to play around with the brightness and contrast in Photoshop, here's how we do it. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm clicking on the topmost layer, because if I click on this layer and I try to make adjustments and changes, we're not gonna see it. And we're not gonna see it because this photograph is on top of it. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm clicking on our first upmost layer that's on the top, and I'm gonna go to our half moon cookie. That's what it kind of looks like, right? When you think a half moon cookie. And from there we have so many options, so many options. But we're gonna start off with simple basic editing. We're gonna go with the brightness and contrast. So from there, you're gonna see another layer that comes on top of it. Now this layer, it's not in use yet because we haven't made any changes to it. So we have these sliders. Sliders determine how bright, how dark, because we're in the brightness and darkness. So all the way to the left is 0. Look how dark it got. Ooh, that kind of looks moody. And then 100, 150 in this case, is brightness, super bright. Okay, so I'm gonna go back down to 0. That's what we kind of started off with, or you can even input your number here if you want to. So this is what the picture originally started like. I actually liked it a little bit darker, so I'm gonna go down to -38. Now, if you want to see that change versus the original photograph, these eyeballs right here are kind of like think about it like seeing, like what do you want to see, what do you not want to see? If I don't want to see this brightness and contrast layer that I just created, if I don't want to see that effect, you know, like that pop-up box is telling me, it indicates your layer visibility. So I'm going to click it off. So now that's showing me the before picture and after. Gonna do it one more time. That's the before picture and that's the after, just by clicking on that eyeball. And this concept works of the sliders. That's how Photoshop works with it, with these options here. So let's go to hue and saturation. So it's another layer that I just added on top. So if you want to increase that saturation, now she's got that Cheeto look, or decrease the saturation, now it's black and white. You can do that there. So I actually like the black and white vibe, so I'm gonna make it black and white. Another way to make that black and white, much more quicker way, is just by going on black and white. So you can either change the saturation or go to black and white. The reason why I like to do it in the hue and saturation layer is because I can now then increase the lightness of it or make it a little bit darker. So you get more options if you do it this way. Hues is not going to work because the picture is in black and white, but I'm going to put it up in color so you can now see the hue changes. So you can make her green. Oh, she looks like some type of alien. Or we can make her another type of alien. So you can change the hue and saturation by just playing with the sliders. I'm gonna set this back to 0 and I'm gonna decrease that saturation just a bit to give it a little washed out look. My preference, that's what I like. And I'm gonna maybe, just bring that up. I'm just gonna put it like right there. Boom. So that's basically how you start off with, you know, editing. When I first get a picture, the first thing that I want to do is make sure that my levels of brightness and contrast and my saturation is correct. So that's the first step that I take when I'm photo editing. Let me know in the comments below what your first steps are. I'm curious, but I find it easier to just start off with changing the brightness and the contrast instead of waiting till the end, because you don't want to make all these edits to your picture. And then if you increase the brightness or decrease the brightness or whatever you choose, it looks kind of wonky. So this is the first step to me on how you do photo editing in Photoshop. In our next video, we're going to be going over layer masks.